Welcome to the NBAV podcast.
Welcome back to NBAV and the NBA Avenue podcast. This is March 7th, 2024. We had 8 games happen last night. I guess let's start in a little bit of reverse order with what's freshest. We can start off with the Lakers on their home court taking on the Sacramento Kings. Now, both of these teams have had very up and down seasons. Neither one has been a modicum of consistency in any way. And that really continued to show itself last night, where it was a tale of the first quarter and then a tale of the ensuing 3 quarters, where the Lakers came out on their home court and they were hot. They got going right away, got out to a big lead. They were up by at least 15 points and then quickly fizzled out. And by the time it was halftime, they were already down by 15 points. And then the Lakers made several pushes throughout the third and fourth quarters to come back, but they weren't able to get it done all the way. So there you have the Lakers coming out hot and then fizzling out real quick. And you have the Kings, where it was mostly not really a big, it was an all-around solid statistic game for Sabonis, but it was mostly De'Aaron Fox with his 44 points, Malik Monk with his 26 points, and those were the big hitters. And then you had Davion Mitchell come out of nowhere and hit 4 3-pointers. I think they were all towards the beginning of the ball game. If my recollection serves me correctly, I don't recall him hitting any of them in the third or fourth quarters. I could be wrong. Maybe there was one in the third, but I believe that all of them were towards the beginning of the game. Davion Mitchell coming out, and in only 18 minutes, he scored 12 points, 4 shots that he made, and they were all threes. So that's nice to see from Davion Mitchell, because he was part of all the success that they were having against Golden State in the playoffs last season, and now you're starting to see him at least throw a good game out there, where he's hopefully not just going to be this forgotten player. If he can start to put together some good shooting nights combined with his pretty good defense, then you have a player who can be helpful again for you in the playoffs. So it's good to see him getting those 18 minutes. A little curious to know why he didn't play as much in the second half after he had such a good first half, but maybe they just want to leave it and see if this good game, this promising game, leads to more future games, get him in a good headspace, and get him moving in the right direction. But I think I would have liked to see him play a little bit more in the second half. Regardless, doesn't really matter. They got the victory, and that's what matters most for Sacramento at this point in the season, is certainly to win games and move out of this play-in range and try to get up into the 6th seed or higher. That would be a great thing for Sacramento. So Sacramento able to get it done. And when you watch Sacramento play and you see just how talented De'Aaron Fox is, you start to think. And when I talk negatively about the Kings, it's not because I don't like the Kings. Completely on the contrary, I like the Kings a lot. But it's because it's hard to understand why the Kings don't play well all the time. Because when you have a player like Fox, and he has a pretty solid roster built around him, it's hard to understand. Fox is a lethal scorer because he can do it in any spot on the court. Virtually any spot. I mean, he doesn't end up taking as many threes. I'm sure if you looked at a shot chart of where he shoots from, it's probably mostly straight away near the top of the key, the top of the three-point line, or from maybe inching towards the right wing or inching towards the left wing, but all probably in that more center of the court area, versus he doesn't get as many from the corners because that's just not typically where he's handling the ball. Typically, he gets the ball, he brings up the ball, and he's at the top, and then he's either able to cut inside, he's either able to drive inside and do his floater, get to the basket, but he doesn't typically end up passing it out and relocating and hitting a corner 3. That's just not typically what De'Aaron Fox does. But in terms of being able to score at all the different distances, he's really lethal from anywhere on the court. And he did that the entire season last year. He was doing that in the playoff series against Golden State, and he's still able to do it. So he can hit the 3. He can hit the mid-range. He can get all the way to the basket. He can hit the floater. He can hit the fadeaway from in close. He has every type of shot in his arsenal, from right up to from a layup, a dunk, to 5 feet away, 10 feet away, 15 feet away, a three. He has all of them. And then on top of that, he has all the hesitation, all the moves. Last night, he busted out this move where he did sort of a Rondo-esque move where he faked the lay-in, pivoted out, and then got the wide open bucket when the defender flew past him. So he has so many moves, and he's so talented. It's just hard to understand why he doesn't do this all the time. Why are the Kings in the position where they're in right now fighting to move out of a play-in spot versus just being closer to the top of the Western Conference? And when you look at the roster, and they have Malik Monk, and I'm so excited to see how much money this guy makes in the offseason. I don't know if I'm overhyping it and if I'm in the minority here, but Malik Monk should get a ton of money from somebody. Absolute ton of money. I mean, he scored last night. He in 32 minutes, he scores 26 points and also chips in with 8 assists and 5 rebounds. That is an incredible stat line for only 32 minutes of play. And he also is just an absolutely lethal scorer. And it's not like he's this guy who's a good shooter, but he absolutely kills you on the defensive end. He has some athleticism too. He gets up and he throws down these dunks. So the ability athletically is there. So I don't think he's considered a good defensive player by any means, but he has the ability to compete on that end of the floor. And wanting to compete on defense is half the difference right there, right? Where you have a guy like Steph Curry, and he's so talented on offense, but when he wants to compete on defense, and he's shown over his career that he has the willingness to compete on defense, that makes a big difference. And when you have Trae Young and he's committed to being better on defense, it makes a big difference for them. But on nights where he's not as committed, it kills them. When Luka wants to be committed on defense, it's half the battle right there. So you have a guy like Malik Monk who has all the athleticism, and then certainly on offense he has every ability to score the basketball. He can shoot threes. He can get to the basket. He can throw down emphatic dunks. He can get assists. He can do everything. So this guy is poised for a massive payday in the offseason. We'll see if Sacramento is able to give that to him or if they're going to have to make some moves because they are already dialed into a couple of pretty hefty salaries with Fox and Sabonis, and I believe Barnes makes some good money as well. So you're going to have to really try to be creative if you're going to figure out how much money you can offer Malik Monk, and I think it's going to be quite a lot. Really, really quite a lot of money. So we'll see what the Sacramento Kings do in order to keep him. But you have Sacramento getting the victory last night against the Lakers, and that's just the first game of all of the action that we had. So, well, the last game of all the action, but the first one that we looked at. Now we go a little bit starting from the top. The first game of the night was Orlando going against the Washington Wizards. And Orlando doing what we thought they would do. The Wizards hung in there for a lot of the game. But at the end of the game, that's when the most important minutes are, and the Orlando Magic able to do what they do pretty much on a consistent basis. And now the Orlando Magic have won 5 games in a row, and they're 8-2 in their last 10. And they've definitely been the benefactors of a bit of an easier schedule here. Let's look at the last several games that the Orlando Magic have had to play. Just in their, I mean, it's wow. It's just an incredibly easy schedule over the last 7 or so. They just beat the Washington Wizards. In the game before that, they beat the Hornets. The game before that, they beat the Pistons. The game before that, they beat the Jazz. And the game before that, they beat the Nets. So in this 5-game win streak, it's been the Brooklyn Nets, the Utah Jazz, the Pistons, the Hornets, and the Wizards. So you don't really get an easier stretch of 5 games than that right there for the Magic. But you gotta just get what you're dealt. It's like a hand of poker. You have to play with the hands that you have. And the Magic took advantage of this hand. And now things are going to start to get a little tougher for them. They're going to go play the Knicks, who have some injury issues, and then they're going to go play the Pacers. And then they're going to go back to playing the Nets and the Raptors again, and the Hornets, and then the Pelicans. So not a murderer's row for the Orlando Magic, and they've taken advantage of these last 5 games. And even if you want to go before those last 5, they lost a game to the Hawks, And then if you go the game before that, they beat the Pistons. So they've really had a massively easy schedule. I would wager over the last 5 games, you can't make an easier schedule than what Orlando has had, but they took advantage of it, and now they're going to remain in that 4th seed. Really incredible for Orlando. This shows you when the standings are so bunched together like they are both in the Eastern Conference and in the Western Conference, and you win 5 games in a row, just 5 games in a row, look at what that can do for you. They can move you up from 8 to 4. And there was a point earlier in the season where the Phoenix Suns had a similar stretch where the Suns were looking out of it, and then they won 6 games in a row, and suddenly they were in 5 or 6 seed. So winning 5 or 6 ball games in a row, when the standings are this bunched up, is absolutely massive. So when you get opportunities in the NBA to get that easier schedule, you got to take advantage of it, and Orlando is doing just that. You got to be proud of what they've done this season so far. Moving on to the next game last night, it was the Cleveland Cavaliers coming off of a massive victory in Boston, where they went ahead right near the end of the ball game. They got the lead, and then there was maybe, 15 to 20 seconds. I forget the exact amount of seconds that were remaining for Jason Tatum to try and create a shot. Ultimately, Tatum missed, and with 0.7 left, they had a jump ball at center court, and that was all she wrote. So the Cavaliers ended the Boston Celtics 11-game win streak, and now they go and they lose to the Atlanta Hawks. And again, this was without their star player Mitchell, so Garland was trying to lead them to victory, and they were down for basically this entire game, and the Hawks were playing pretty well. Bogdanovich had a smooth, solid game. DeJounte Murray was able to take advantage whenever the Cavaliers had the backup point guard in, right? Because when Mitchell and Garland are both not on the court at the same time, you have to play with the backup, Sam Merrill. So not exactly too great over there. So whenever you have the smaller guard in trying to defend DeJounte Murray is able to get into the paint and rise up for his 2-point shot, and that's his favorite shot. DeJounte Murray is way better from 2-point range than from 3-point range, and you can tell that in virtually any game that you watch. Murray has his moments, but when he feels like he has the switch or he feels like he has the advantage on a smaller defender, he takes advantage of it. And he did that when they played against the Golden State Warriors. If you remember back, last time they played Golden State, whenever he had Pajemski on him, Murray ate him alive. So Murray's able to do that. Where Murray sometimes struggles is when he tries to shoot from 3, and he just doesn't really have that same consistent ability. But from 2, he's fantastic. So when Murray has the size advantage, he really is able to exploit that. So the Hawks able to get that win, and the Cavaliers tried to come back late at the end of the ball game. There were a couple of good plays from Niang, and Niang has just become a solid player in the NBA just through his effort and through working on his game. He's a great example of a player who doesn't have perhaps the athleticism. He doesn't jump out of the building. He doesn't look like an amazing athlete, and he has an interesting build to him. But just through hard work, consistency, improving your game, Niang has become a piece that most NBA teams would really value and would really want on their team, not as the top option, second option, or third option, but he's a real contributor, a real NBA player, and you have to compliment him on that, because you would think that 9 out of 10 George Niangs who come into the NBA don't end up succeeding, but he is the exception. He is the last few percent who's made something out of not as much of what you would have thought he could be, but he's really turned this into a solid NBA career for himself. So good work there from Niang, but ultimately the Cavs not able to complete the comeback. They also had a play where they threw the ball away, and the Hawks had a play where they threw the ball away to Okoro on Cleveland, and that was part of the potential comeback, but then the Hawks able to put this thing on ice with some nice plays, a nice cut inside and a reverse layup from Bogdanovich, and then also a nice left wing 3 from Bogdanovich. Bogdanovich was really good in this game, and the Hawks ultimately able to get a victory that probably most people did not think that they were going to get. So the Hawks now winning 2 games in a row. So they're now suddenly going from, it looked like they were going to lose every game for the rest of the season with Trae Young out, and now they've won 2 games back-to-back. So look how quickly things can shift and how surprisingly things can shift on a nightly basis in the NBA. Then you had the Memphis Grizzlies beating the 76ers in a game where it looked a little shaky right there at the end. The Grizzlies were kind of waffling with this game up in the air coming down to the wire, but they ended up being able to hold on and beating the Sixers. The Sixers, it's hard. It's definitely hard to win when you don't have any of your players. The Sixers didn't have Maxey last night. They obviously didn't have Joel Embiid for the last while. And you had big minutes from Cam Payne. Buddy Hield hit some good threes trying to put them back in it. You had two players also fouling out. So you had Paul Reed fouling out. And then you also had Kenyon Martin Jr. fouling out. So the Sixers, with two guys fouling out, they got their money's worth in the foul department. And when you have you're already decimated by injury, and then you also get a couple of players fouling out, it's tough to win a game like that. You would still like to hope they could beat the Grizzlies. But yeah, Jaren Jackson Jr. continuing to do what he does pretty much all the time. He puts up 30 points when he puts up, 20 to 30 points on any time he plays when all of these other guys, the star players, aren't in for the Grizzlies. He's been very consistent in games that he's played. And then you had a quieter G.G. Jackson game, but you had a good Jake LaRavia game. And Jake LaRavia is, from what I saw from him last night, he has a good ability to get to the hoop, and then he doesn't have the greatest touch when he's at the hoop. So he has the attributes that you would want from a player like him. Like, he has the length, he has the ability to get inside and create, but then he had several times in the game where he just threw it up and it looked more like a brick once he got to the basket. He doesn't have that touch. Now, sometimes he's able to, like last night, where he was able to, on occasion, get the ball back and get the putback because he had the position, which is good. You'd like to see him get inside and get the position, but he definitely needs to work on that touch. Like where players like Kyrie Irving, and I know it's tough to compare him to such a talented, skilled player, but where a guy like Kyrie Irving, when he gets to the basket, he has all the touch, and he's able to get the ball to drop into the hoop. You have a guy like LaRavia, where that's definitely an area where he needs to work on, but you saw some good things from him last night, and that's what Memphis is really looking for. They're looking to see which of these players like Vince Williams, which of these players like G.G. Jackson are able to show you that they have something that might be a glimmer and a diamond in the rough, and then maybe they can be part of the future there in Memphis starting next season when hopefully Ja Morant will come back. And the Grizzlies will have Desmond Bane back, and they'll be looking forward. Maybe they'll even have Brandon Clark back, and they can hopefully be looking forward to a good season next year. But for the 76ers, another disappointing loss. This one really disappointing because you thought you had a chance to beat the Grizzlies, but unfortunately, no. So we'll take a look at the standings soon and see exactly where the Sixers ended up after last night's loss as they continue their free fall into oblivion. The Clippers getting a win against the Rockets. The Rockets, they don't have much to play for, and they tried, and it was a close game, and it was good, but we're not going to focus too much on that one. It was the game after Şengün put up a monster game, and he put up a great game last night as well. He had the really solid triple-double with 23 points, 19 rebounds, 14 assists. But, hey, you're the less talented team, so we're not going to get too much on the case of the Rockets. You just want to see them play hard. You want to see them trying to win, and whatever happens, happens. The Bulls beat the Jazz 119-117. I don't know if anybody actually watched that game, but, hey, victory for the Bulls, loss for the Jazz. Close game, it's all good. You had the Milwaukee Bucks going to challenge the Golden State Warriors in Golden State. So the Warriors really put in a complete game from start to finish. At the beginning, it looked like this was going to be somewhat of a duel between Steph Curry and Damian Lillard, where each of them were defending each other, and Steph hit a three, Lillard came back and hit a three, and both of them were contesting the threes. So it was contested three hit by Lillard, contested three the other way hit by Steph Curry. But then the Golden State Warriors were smart. They didn't turn it into that. They got the rest of the team involved. And there's a lot to talk about with this Golden State roster now that everyone is back and healthy. Because they really have a nice-looking roster when everybody's out there. They really do. You have the big men. You have the good athletic players. Now that Wiggins is back, and he played 14 minutes last night, so he's back. And you have Kuminga, obviously super, super athletic. And then you have Trace Jackson Davis, who like massively impressive. He's deceptively a big body. And he made some plays last night that we're going to talk about soon, but wow. And then you have a guy like Looney coming off the bench. So many big guys who really can give you good minutes. And I didn't even bring up Draymond Green. So you really have some pieces there. And you have Gary Payton Jr., who jumps out of the building, Gary Payton II, who jumps out of the building. And you have then obviously put Steph and Clay and Chris Paul, who's healthy now, put all of them into the mix, and Pajemski and all of that. So really an impressive roster when they're all there. And when they're playing well, they are the number one team in the league in terms of when you watch them and your jaw just drops at what's happening. And now they're also taking much more advantage of the running ability and the leaping ability of Jonathan Kuminga, where they just chuck the ball down the court to him. And they just say, go and get it. And they don't even try to put the ball in the perfect spot. They just chuck it down, and they know that Kuminga most likely is going to be the first one there, and he's going to be able to get the dunk. But what I also really love about the way Kuminga's been playing is he has all the ability to do all the crazy dunks, a 360 dunk, a tomahawk, get real flashy with it, but he never does. Every time, he gets the ball, and he just dunks it in quickly, he puts it down, and he goes back for defense. So that's a really great habit that he has, which a lot of teams in the league don't have. Like when you watch the Lakers game last night, I'm just using them to contrast against the Warriors because they both played last night. When LeBron scores, he almost always is doing a show for the crowd, and that's okay. It's LeBron James. He's in the twilight of his career, and he's still able to do that, which is amazing. But it's much more of a culture where it's a Lake show, where it's a show. And granted, it is entertainment. And on yesterday's episode, we talked about how Dennis Schroeder and Dennis Smith Jr. in Brooklyn were doing that. They were doing a lot of shenanigans after they dunked or after they scored at the hoop, and where they were like doing a bit more showy. And granted, look, they're entertainers. They like to entertain the crowd. That's what they do. So you can't blame them too much for it, but it is really nice to see a player like Kuminga, where you have a lot of young players in the league who are trying to make a name for themselves, and they sometimes get a little carried away with the way they dunk and 360 and tomahawk and this and that and try to get the highlight. Kuminga never tries for the highlight, and he really could. Compare Kuminga to a guy like Jalen Green on the Rockets, where Jalen Green, for his career so far, has been largely about the highlight. But Kuminga is not like that at all. It's hard to think of a time where he ever tries to do that. His highlights are classics. They're just get the ball out in transition, boom, whoa, he just took off like a cheetah and he's ahead of the pack. And he just lays it in and boom, he's back on defense. So that's fantastic. I love watching the way Kuminga's been playing lately. And then when you have Trayce Jackson-Davis blocking Giannis 3 times, 3 blocks on Giannis at the rim. 2 of them were on one play. And then he got another one on a separate play. And then he was able to get a couple of dunks going back the other way. And Trayce Jackson-Davis just eating the inbounds pass at the end of that game. Trayce Jackson-Davis is really becoming another great big body for the Warriors. He's an exciting player. And it's not that he's doing anything, again, nothing crazy. He's playing a fundamental basketball game, and that's really exciting. I didn't love the quote that Kerr said. I mean, I like the idea of when Kerr was at MSG and he said, solid brings the show, or solid leads to the show. I don't think it's a great quote, like, solid leads to the show, but the sentiment is really great, where you're like, yeah, if you play solid basketball, it will lead to a good show for the crowd, and that's really true. So I think he could have workshopped the phrasing a little bit. Something, I don't know. I would have to think about how to phrase it exactly. But the idea is definitely true from Steve Kerr, where when they play fundamental basketball, it's really exciting. And then you talk about Draymond Green, where when Draymond Green hit back-to-back three-pointers in this game, he hit one from straight away, and then he hit one from the right corner, the whole arena is smiling, and they flashed it to the crowd, and you just can't help but smile as Draymond Green runs back the other way with both hands out like an airplane, making the three-point signal with his hands. So it's just hilarious. You just can't help but smile when Draymond does that, and he's just in his bag, bringing everything that he does to that team. And then, he hits the 2 3-pointers in a row? what are you going to do? Granted, he was absolutely wide open. They didn't even make an attempt to close out on him. But yeah, great Warriors game against the Milwaukee Bucks last night. And Steph was super hot the whole game. I mean, he started off really hot, and then he went back to that in the fourth quarter. So he kind of started out real good, ended out real good, and it was never really that close. The Bucks made a couple of pushes to come back, but it never really got that close. And that's pretty much what you had last night in the Golden State Warriors. So it's nice to see them healthy, and it's going to be really nice to see what they can do. They're moving back in front of the Lakers with their win and the Lakers loss, but we'll get to the standings in just a minute. The Thunder doing what they do, beating the Trailblazers last night in a pretty close game, but we're not going to focus on that too much. 128-120, Thunder with another victory, getting back in the W column after a couple of losses. And then the Sacramento Kings beating the Lakers, which was the first game that we discussed. Lakers started off quick and then fizzled out. Kings getting a W, a much-needed one. So now let's take a look at the standings. We'll start in the Eastern Conference, where Celtics, Bucks, Cavaliers, and then the Magic off their 5-game win streak, like we already discussed. Then you have the Knicks in 5 and the Heat in 6. The Sixers dropped to 7. Well, they were already kind of in 7. They were in a tie with Miami before this game, but now that they lost and Miami didn't play, the Sixers are half a game back of Miami officially, so it goes from a tie to the Sixers having sole possession of the 7 seed, and they continue the free fall, and then the Pacers half a game back from them in 8, Bulls in 9, Hawks in 10, with a 3-game lead on the Brooklyn Nets. So not much changing there in the Eastern Conference from last night. And then you have the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Thunder tied atop the Western Conference. And let's just talk for a minute about Karl Anthony Towns and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, I've watched a bit of Timberwolves basketball this year, and it's very clear that when the Timberwolves are in a close game at the end of the ball game, that they struggle. Now, I know that Timberwolves fans really love this team, and they're passionate about this team because they are atop the league, and it's exciting after so many years where you don't have it that great to be atop the league. And this isn't a case where it was like the year where they had Jimmy Butler and they just made it to the playoffs, and the fans were ecstatic just to see them in the playoffs, and you had the Pat Beverly jumping on the scorer's table and throwing off his jersey and all of that, and it was exciting just to see them in the playoffs. And then last season they got a taste of playoffs, and now it's another level up from that because they're on top of the NBA. So I understand that the Timberwolves fans love this. So sometimes I come at the Timberwolves on Twitter because I like to think about what are the odds of championship, because it's not really about just having a good record in the regular season, especially if you've been to the playoffs in recent years, which the Timberwolves were in the playoffs last season, and you had some great moments from Anthony Edwards. It's more about the lens of, can we win a championship? And that's what I like to think about, because the championship is really the ultimate goal, especially when you know that you're already a good team. But the Timberwolves fans really, they take a lot of offense when I do that, because they say, because when I talk about how there's a logjam at the top of the team between Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, which manifests itself at the end of a close ball game where it's kind of tough to know who should be getting the ball right there at the end. I would think that Edwards should. That would be my opinion. But sometimes Edwards has that thought in the back of his head, and this is just what it looks like watching the games. It looks like Edwards has that thought where he's like, I'm a little bit doubtful of what I'm creating on this possession. Let me swing it out to Karl Anthony Towns, and let's see what he can do. And then sometimes Towns has to swing it back to Edwards. So it's a bit of a logjam. And I think if you were trying to construct the roster in the best way possible for them to win, I don't think you would have Towns and Edwards on the same team. I think you would maybe have Edwards with Gobert at center, and then you would, instead of having Towns, you would have another great scorer or another great wing. That would probably be best case scenario. Or if you didn't have Edwards, I don't really even want to look at that side. I think you want Edwards. If you're a Timberwolves fan, I think you want Edwards over Towns, and I think that's pretty clear. But the Timberwolves fans chirp back, and they say, well, hey, Edwards, Towns was only there for 29 games last season. And we saw what that looked like. So the games that Towns wasn't there, it's clearly much better to have him. And yes, of course it's better to have Karl Anthony Towns than not have him. He's a guy who's a big boy. He can shoot the three-pointer. He's tough to stop. He's talented. The main flaw with Towns in the NBA is just his decision-making in close games. So that's really and over time in his career, he's slowly getting the monkey off his back, but every now and again, the monkey rears its head again, and it may rear its head again in the playoffs. But now you have a situation where Towns has apparently, this has just come out this morning, so it wasn't out yesterday, but we just thought he had knee soreness and he was going to miss a couple of games and he'll be back and all is good. Rest up, get healthy, it's going to be okay. And then Karl Anthony Towns was going to come back for this Sunday's game when they play the Lakers, a big game, a game that Towns really wants to be there for. So he was going to rest up for that one, which is fine. Players get hurt, players miss some time, and then players come back, and hopefully they're healthy. And nobody wants to hear of players going down. We had a really scary moment earlier in the week last week where Jalen Brunson, we thought he was done for the season because of a non-contact injury. And now there's a scary moment in Minnesota where Karl Anthony Towns has apparently torn his meniscus, and it's very up in the air right now. They're not clearly coming out and saying that he's done for the year. And with meniscus, it's like, I'm not a doctor, but from what I've understand, I've had some friends who have torn their meniscus. It's not all meniscus tears are created equal, and you can play in some cases, it seems like. So it's unclear, will Karl Anthony Towns be able to play the rest of the season like his usual self, and then get it taken care of perhaps in the offseason, get it cleaned up? But then you also hear of other cases of torn meniscus where it's really a severe kind of rehab process. So it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens with this. Obviously, you want to see Karl Anthony Towns on the court, but I just want to be clear that when you talk about Minnesota and their odds to win a finals, and you talk about how, hey, when Karl Anthony Towns is out, with Edwards getting better and better and better, it's interesting to see how they're going to play for the rest of the season, potentially without him. That doesn't mean that you want Karl Anthony Towns to be injured. Nobody in their right mind wants NBA players to be injured. You want the whole league to be 100% healthy for 100% of the time. That would be the dream because you would get the best possible basketball. Of course, that's what you want. And nobody wants to see a young man who has a lot of promise and a lot of talent and a lot of skill get hurt. That's definitely not what we want. But sometimes where I come out and I say, hey, it'll be interesting to see how the Timberwolves are going to play with Karl Anthony Towns out. Will they be a little bit more effective at the end of a ball game just running through Edwards? Sometimes you have a little bit of a case of addition by subtraction. Now, in the entire game scale, that's for sure not going to be true because Towns is such a big part of that team with the current roster construction, where of course it's going to hurt them. How can it not? But perhaps there is also going to be a flip side where at the end of a game, it'll be a little bit clearer how they're going to operate. So it'll hurt them on the whole, but there are phases where maybe it's going to give you a little glimpse of, hey, well, at the end of the ball game, this is kind of how we want the offense to look. So yes, we want Towns to come back healthy. We want to hear good news, and we wanted good news from Jalen Brunson. And we really want good news about every NBA player because it's not fun to watch them not play. It's fun to watch them play. That's what we love to watch. So Timberwolves fans can, relax a little bit, try to just take it easy, and hopefully he'll be back soon. Hopefully he'll be fine. Hopefully he'll be okay. And hopefully we'll get to see what they look like in the playoffs again with him. But if they are without him, then it'll be a little bit similar to how this season has been in Cleveland. And I reference Cleveland and Minnesota a lot because they are kind of similar in the sense where they both put up amazing records so far in the regular season, but we don't know how far that's going to take them in the playoffs because of how they've looked. Well, for Cleveland, how they've looked recently, how they've looked in games where Mitchell and Garland are both on the floor together, and it's kind of a situation where you both of these teams, the Timberwolves and the Cavaliers, have star players who don't necessarily seem to complement each other perfectly. And I think that's very, very, very fair to say about Minnesota, and it's very fair to say about Cleveland. So just that is what we have to say about the Timberwolves, and we'll see what happens from here out with that Karl Anthony Towns injury. But you have Minnesota and Oklahoma City tied atop the Western Conference standings with identical records of 43 and 19. Then the Nuggets, 1 game back from them, and the Clippers, a game and a half back from the Nuggets in 4. You still have the Pelicans, who didn't play last night. They are in 5, and then you have the Suns in 6, the Kings still in 7 with their victory last night, and the Mavericks a game and a half back from the Kings in the 8th seed. The Mavericks trying to right the ship. They've lost their last 3, so a very surprising losing streak there in Dallas. And then you have the Warriors a half a game up on the Lakers. The Lakers and Warriors keep flip-flopping in the standings with each other. Last night, Warriors win, Lakers lose. Warriors are back in front, and they're only a half a game back of the Dallas Mavericks now, and they're playing at the top of their game, beating the Bucks last night. So what do we have coming up on the docket tonight? You've got 7 games of basketball, starting with the Timberwolves playing against the Pacers. It's hard to know what to expect from the Pacers. Sometimes they play really well, and sometimes they don't. When they're committed on defense and they can run on offense, they are a really tough team to beat, which Dallas has found out a couple of times in the last 10 games or so, losing 2 games to the Pacers. So the Pacers against the Timberwolves, it'll be a good game. Karl Anthony Towns obviously not going to suit up for this one, so let's see exactly what happens there. It should still be a good game of NBA action between the Timberwolves and between the Pacers. Then you have the Nets and the Pistons in a game that probably no one will watch. Then you have the Heat going against the Mavericks. The Heat are heating up, and the Heat are in the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. So they're looking to stay there or potentially move up to the 5 or maybe even the 4 seed. All of that is on the horizon. It's a possibility for Miami, and the Mavericks are desperate for victories because they don't want to drop further into the play-in and have to potentially play 2 games back-to-back just to get into a full 7-game playoff series. So it's kind of a bit of panic time out there in Dallas as they're having flashbacks of what happened last season where they sort of intentionally dropped out of the play-in, and here they're in danger of dropping into a play-in going against the Miami Heat tonight. So, I mean, they're currently in a play-in, but they're potentially going to drop to even further back as Golden State is on their heels. If the Mavericks lose and the Warriors win tonight, then the Warriors will officially be in front of the Mavericks. So definitely some stuff to watch there. And then you have the Raptors challenging the Phoenix Suns. The Suns were able to get a big victory in overtime against the Nuggets in a game where they were way ahead, and then they blew the lead, and then they went back up ahead and had a strong overtime performance from Durant and a strong overtime performance from Beal. It'll be interesting to see if Devin Booker comes back tonight or not. Is Booker expected back? Let's see. If we just quickly type in the Google machine, what's happening with Devin Booker? Update on Devin Booker. Let's see. Is Booker expected back? It's a little bit unclear if he's going to be present for this game tonight. Hopefully he is. Either way, the Suns should have enough firepower to beat the Raptors. Let's see if they're able to execute on their home floor, where they're typically a lot better than they are on the road, right? I've gone through this many times throughout the season, but the Suns at home are 20-13, and on the road they're 16-13. So they have they've played more home games and they've won more home games, and they've lost the same amount of games on home and at the road, but they have another 4 victories at home. So the Suns definitely a much higher winning percentage at home. So the Suns should be able to get it done tonight. Let's see if they do. They definitely need it with where they are in the standings. The Spurs are going to play the Kings. So the Kings, coming off a great victory last night against the Lakers, have an opportunity to go back-to-back. I know that they're playing on the second night of a back-to-back, but you've got to be able to beat the Spurs tonight. Spurs have been playing a little better, I know, but you've got to be able to beat them tonight if you're Sacramento. And then the Celtics are going to play the Nuggets. This is the NBA Finals preview, potentially. It's what all signs are pointing to. Celtics against the Nuggets, and I think that it's going to be a real interesting one. All eyes are going to be on this game tonight. This is for sure the most interesting game of the night. Celtics against the Denver Nuggets. Celtics finally losing a game, so they're going to be coming back with a vengeance, and they're going to be trying to show that we got this. If we make it to the finals against the Nuggets, we got them. And the Nuggets, conversely, are going to be trying to show that they're still the team to beat. So hopefully everybody plays in tonight's game. Hopefully nobody sits out, and we get to see what really could be a preview of the NBA Finals. And then in the final game of tonight, you have the Bulls going to be taking on the Golden State Warriors, and the Bulls have been playing pretty well. They had a really cool comeback a couple of games ago, and they won again last night against Utah. So the Bulls are riding high, and the Warriors are also riding high, but you've got to like the Warriors' chances at home. And if the Warriors can win this matchup against the Bulls, there is potential that the Warriors could move into the 8th seed depending on what happens in that Heat versus Mavericks matchup. So in terms of excitement tonight, the really good games are the Heat against the Mavericks, the Celtics against the Nuggets. Those are the two best ones. And then in terms of standings and impact on the standings, you also have the Pacers against the Timberwolves, the Raptors against the Suns, the Spurs against the Kings, and the Warriors against the Bulls, where in those matchups, there's really one team that will affect the standings, right? The Timberwolves doesn't really matter if they're 1 or 2, but the Pacers, they're in 8. What's going to happen with them? The Suns in 6. What's going to happen with them? The Kings in 7. What's going to happen with them? And the Warriors in 9. What will happen with them? So I think that for us and NBAV, you can follow the show at NBAV, that's NBAVE, and NB Avenue, that's NBAVENUE, on social, and the email is NBAVENUE at yahoo.com, in NBAvenue at yahoo.com, where you can reach out with your questions and comments. For us, I think that just about does it. We are your source for a great time every time, and until next time, we are out.